Hello, and thank you for joining us to learn about accessibility in Word. I'm Kimberly Berry, Able Tech Teacher of the Visually Impaired. You never know when an individual may need to read your documents with assistive technology, such as a screen reader or an electronic braille device. That's why it's important to make all your documents accessible from the start. Luckily, Microsoft Word includes easy-to-use tools to increase access and readability for all. During this webinar, AbleTech ICT Accessibility Coordinator Lissa Prince will provide 6 tips that will put you on track for clear communications. Let's welcome our presenter, Lissa Prince. Lissa joined AbleTech in May of 2018 as an Information and Communication Technology Accessibility Coordinator. She helps groups from across Oklahoma, such as Oklahoma Works, to ensure that their websites and digital media are accessible and usable for all. So welcome, Lissa.
Hi there, everyone, and thank you, Kim, for that introduction. So I actually have been working with accessibility in some form or other since about 2011, when I was a student at the University of Oklahoma. I wasn't exactly working full-time in accessibility, but I kind of incorporated accessibility into my job as a project manager and then as a knowledge manager. So when the opportunity came up at AbleTech to join full-time, to do this work full-time, I was very excited. And I hope that the things that I show you today are going to help you be able to share your documents more widely, and also maybe give you a few tips that make your lives a little easier when it comes to Word as well. Today, like Kim said, we're going to talk a little bit about 6 tips for accessibility using Microsoft Word. And you may be asking yourself why. Kim gave a little background, but I kind of wanted to talk about some goals that I kind of have for accessibility. So really, it's that your content is available to the widest audience possible. Like Kim said, you may never know if there's a student or somebody who needs to access your content using something like assistive technology, like a screen reader or a braille device. So really, it's best to go ahead and bake this stuff into the document so that it's available if the time comes for somebody to need the content presented in another way. There are 2 ways you can accomplish this goal, and these will kind of be evident as we go through the different points of today. You'll kind of see these sort of repeat themselves. Matching presentation and structure is the first one, and this is really meaning that the way the content is presented visually needs to match what's kind of presented on the back end, and that's what's available to assistive technologies such as screen readers. And then the second point is to ensure that your content is visibly perceivable. This will really apply to some color things that we discussed kind of midway through the presentation. So those are our goals. With that said, I'll kind of go over the 6 topics that we will cover, and then I'll kind of move into Word to sort of illustrate these, because it's a little bit easier for you to kind of get the picture of what we're trying to do if we actually do a demonstration of it. Before I get to that point, though, I wanted to let you guys know that an expanded PowerPoint is available online for you guys. So you can kind of get the screenshots and some more information that I'll be kind of talking through, and you don't have to remember every single little mouse click I do. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. All right, so our 6 topics are heading structure, list structure, text equivalents, descriptive link text, color use and contrast, and data tables. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and flip over to my Word document. And I have kind of set up a document just to kind of save some time. So I've got some content in here in the document already, and we'll just kind of go through here and demonstrate the concepts that I listed out just a minute ago. The first one that we've got is headings. So, you may be familiar with headings depending upon the content that you kind of write, but headings are really meant to section off your content into digestible chunks. And you may see, when you're going through other documents or things like that, or you may have been taught to create headings using font styles. And so I'll kind of illustrate what that looks like. So if I take my mouse cursor and highlight my section 1 heading that I'm trying to make a heading at least, I will kind of just make it bold, make it larger. And this is typically how people are taught to create a heading. While this is great for people who can see your content, there's nothing behind the scenes letting the assistive technology that may be used on this document know that this is actually intended to be a heading. So what we'll use to fix this problem is these styles up at the very top. So I'm going to go illustrate what it looks like adding headings, and we'll kind of talk about the hierarchy of them as we go through this. So I'm going to actually highlight what I've got, what I just made the changes to, make it back to a normal style, and then I'm going to go hover over the heading 1 and just click that. So now my document has this section 1 text as a heading 1. So the content I kind of have on the page here is meant to be, this is sort of the introduction paragraph that we have that's going to be a heading 1, and then these two are kind of intended to be children of that paragraph. So I've got labeled it section 1A to kind of illustrate that. So since these correspond to that first section 1 heading 1 that we created, these will be a heading 2. So I will just do the same thing by selecting that section 1A and then hovering over heading 2 and clicking that. And the same thing will go for section 1B. So I'm not sure if you guys have been watching the left-hand side of the screen, but as I was doing that, these headings are actually popping up in what's called my navigation pane. This is a really handy feature that Word has added in to sort of help you navigate through your document and see where your sections are. You can actually click any of these and navigate between your sections. So it makes it really nice for you. And you also know if these are there, that somebody who's using assistive technology will have those accessible to them as well. So it's a pretty cool feature. If you happen to not have this pop up for you, you can always get it to pop up if you go to the View tab and then click Navigation Pane in the Show column. So just keep that in mind. It's not always just gone. You can get it back, and it's a pretty handy feature to have available. All right, so when it comes to Word, we have 6 headings available to us. So, I've actually never seen many people get past about heading level 3 unless they have maybe a very, very long specific type of document. But just to kind of reiterate the hierarchy level, if we had some sections that went under section 1A, we would label those as heading 3. So just keep that in mind. It's sort of forming a relationship between all your content. All right, so one other great thing about headings is that if you need to modify the style, you can make a change in one place that will apply to anything you have marked as or using those heading styles. So for instance, if we wanted to maybe change what this section 1 heading 1 looks like, we can do that pretty easily by hovering over the heading 1 in the styles pane and then right clicking and clicking modify. When we do that, we have a window pop up that has a lot of settings that we're used to seeing up in the top of this ribbon. So say we wanted to make this black. I'll just use the automatic color scheme for that and then make it bold. We'll do that and we'll click OK. And now you notice my heading 1 has changed. And as we go through, I actually already have some other headings built into the document just so I could easily navigate this as I was going through the demo document. So these will also be changed as we go through. Just keep an eye out for that. We can also do the same thing for the heading level 2. So we can just right click on heading level 2, click modify, and then maybe change this to just a bolding. So it's still blue, but it's bolder. Now we did that, and you can notice, or you should have noticed, that both of these changed. So this is a great way to keep your document styles more consistent. Say you have a branding change, or you really just want to change up the style of your document. This makes it great for providing the structure that's needed for assistive technology and also making it a little easier on you to keep your document styling consistent.
Hey, Lissa, before you move on, just a couple of quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, the way that your window popped up, the way you found how to modify that style, does that look a little bit different in different versions of Microsoft Word?
That's a great question, Kim. Sometimes that kind of stuff will look a little bit different. The thing I just showed you is going to be pretty standard across all versions. So if you have maybe Microsoft 2013, the one I am using right now is 2016, and Office 365, they've kind of changed the way their ribbon looks, but these menus are still typically pretty much the same at this point. But yeah, that is definitely something to keep an eye on. If you get into your version and it looks a little bit different, you're still going to have the options available to you. You just may need to look in a different place or something like that. And that's always stuff that's very easy to Google as well. I will keep that, or I just kind of want to make that a point. If you know that you need to modify a style, for instance, you can kind of Google that, find your version, and then go from there. And we also have some resources listed at the end of the PowerPoint, that the full version, that will give you some more information about that if you need something for your specific version of Office.
Good points. Thank you, Lissa.
Awesome. Okay, so that covers what I wanted to cover for headings, and we'll move on to our next topic, which is lists. This is a pretty quick one, and it's a very, very similar to point to headings. So, you know, a lot of the time, people creating lists, you know, which is just basically a grouping of similar things. They can be either bulleted or numbered. You may have somebody that maybe or goes in and just does a tab and maybe a dash, something like that. This is going to be the same issue as with headings. A screen reader is not actually going to know that these items are associated, so they're going to hear them kind of separately and have to tie together the fact that they are similarly grouped items. So Word makes this really easy for you to create lists that have both that visual structure that we need and the back-end structure that we need. So since I've laid these out already, I'm going to just select all of them, and then up at the top you have your 3 options for your list. I'll really only talk about these 2, but this first one is bullets, the second one is numbers, and this one is a combination. So it can, you know, if you have a really complicated long list, you can actually go in and it sort of lets you decide if you want numbers and bullets, or numbers, letters, bullets, etc. So anyway, we'll just go ahead and use a bulleted list because these are pretty similar. So when I just click that, now you notice my list has been, or bullets have been added to my list, and they've all been indented. And one other great thing, I kind of included a longer list item. So this kind of illustrates how the indentation works, even for things that have multiple lines. So it really keeps your stuff in order. So somebody coming in and looking at this visually can see very, very clearly that these 3 things are grouped. They're separated from the paragraphs around them, and they're you know, different sort of content. And somebody coming in with a screen reader, for instance, is going to hear this read out instead of just, you know, single specific paragraphs. It's going to actually say list with 3 items and then start listing out the individual items. So it makes it really nice for everyone to be able to see that this is a list, how many items it's got in it, and go from there. So that's a pretty quick one. And if I'll kind of pause if Kim, if you have questions, or if somebody, I don't see anything in the comments, but just give a quick pause in case someone wants to jump in.
I don't see any questions in the comments, but you know, I appreciate you know, the way that you've described the different list types, and I've often been curious about the one that, you know, looks more like the outline. I get myself, you know, really caught up in trying to you know, get the headings correct, and sometimes I'll think, well, this is really an outline, and I'll try to be typing with an outline, and things just get way out of whack. And if you start out with something that wasn't an outline, it gets really hard. So I imagine that's why you're not covering in this section, but are there any accessibility issues with using that, you know, that one that's more like the outline?
I wouldn't see any issues. The main thing is that you have it turned on. So, you know, if you have something, well, I can go ahead and maybe try to change this to something and maybe uncover one of the issues you're talking about. Let's just go with one that's more like this one. So I guess we would maybe have something here and then another item down here. So yeah, basically, if you've already kind of started with this structure, as you just hit enter and then hit tab, it's going to do all the work for you. So that may help with your issue, Kim, if I understand it correctly. It could just help you sort of get your stuff lined out the way it needs to be. So I really recommend, you know, especially if you know you're going to have an outline, just start by clicking that button first. You don't always have to have your items in first like I showed you. You know, say we wanted to start that from scratch, and so I know I'm going to have an outline. I'm just going to immediately go in and then hit this button to get my outline going, and then just start typing.
I think that's the key. That's the key. That's what I have not done in the past. I didn't know, like, to click that before I began my list. So thank you. I've learned something really important. I hope our viewers have as well.
Good deal. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but see, this is why it's great to demo live. It actually did not do what I said it was going to do when I just hit the, hit the button. So you may want to see what happened was it actually kept that heading level 2 structure, so then it kind of messed with it. So you may need to watch that, you know, and it's very clearly showing there's an outline around this. So you may need to kind of turn your style back to a normal style, for instance, if you have anything that messes up maybe when you're trying to do an outline. So just keep that in mind too. Word's not always, you know, super nice to us, I suppose. It can get a little finicky, but typically, seeing, and I don't know, I'm also on a VM. This is my first time using the virtual machine, so there could be an issue with that as well. So I apologize for that little demo glitch, but typically that will work for you.
Hey, it's really good to show how things mess up, and you know, you always kind of wonder when something works perfectly because it won't do that, you know, when we
Yep,
try for real. So
absolutely.
thanks.
It's a real world example right there.
Hmm.
Okay, so if no more questions on that, we'll go ahead and move to our third topic, which is text equivalence. So I could really go over this. I've seen an actual hour-long presentation on this, and if you guys, any of you guys might have heard of Tech Access Oklahoma, that's our conference we put on every year. Last year there was an entire hour on alt text alone, and that's what I'll cover here in a second. So this is a really, really broad topic, and so I'm just giving you kind of a brief glimpse into what this looks like. But text equivalents are really meant to describe images in your content to somebody who can't see them. So, you know, when you're seeing an image and you're kind of deciding what kind of text equivalent you need to put on there, you kind of just think of, you know, maybe how would I describe something or this image to somebody over the phone? You know, so get that really going through your brain and you know, figuring out what this really is trying to convey. And that's the text I have on the screen, is what meaning does this image convey? So there are a couple of ways you can add text equivalents. We'll really cover alt text mostly, but you know, if you have something that's really complex, like a piece of art, maybe we've had some great questions on pieces of art, or complicated graphs, things like that that have just been pasted in as images, you may want to use a combination of text equivalent options. And that could be something like a caption, or also just putting some more description in the body of the document. So that could also work in combination with the thing that I'll show you, which is alt text, which is short for alternative text, by the way. So if you see alt text or alternative text, those are the same thing. All right, so we will add alt text in our Word document with this image that I have on the screen by right-clicking, and then we'll click Format Picture at the very bottom of the menu that pops up. And then to the right, we'll have a menu that pops up. And we will go over to this little box that looks like it has some arrows in it. It's called Layout and Properties. And then we need to click Alt Text. So it's several steps to get to if you're using Word 2016 or Word 2013. They've made it a little bit easier in the newer versions of Word, I think in 2019, and then also Office 365, if any of you are lucky enough to have that. We haven't seen many people that do at this point. But anyway, this is still going to be there in all the versions again, but it just may be in a different spot. So just keep that in mind. But with this one, what we'll need to do is make sure and put the alt text in the description field rather than the title field. The title field is actually just, you know, I don't know if you noticed this, but when I moused over, there's a little box that's below the field and it says title. So that's actually what that would do for this image. So you can use that if you want. It's not necessary. We're really looking for this description field. So what alt text do we need to put in for this image? You know, to me, this is a really funny image. I have dogs and cats, and this happens to me all the time. I have a big dog bed, and my tiny cat will end up on the bed while the dog is just kind of sadly sitting next to the bed, wondering why she can't get the cat to move. So, you know, this image for the alt text, I would say it should probably be something that describes that relationship. You could also just put something in there that describes the dog and what kind of dog it is, what kind of cat it is. You know, it depends on what you're trying to convey with this image again. So if you have, you know, this is part of just like a funny blog or something for me, then I'm going to put the alt text in about the cat taking the dog's bed. So that's what I'll go ahead and write. I'll just say, cat has taken the dog's bed, and the dog is standing sadly out to the side of the bed. It would help if I could type correctly, but there you go. Okay, so once you've put in the description, you don't need to click OK or anything. Your alt text is in there. And you notice for this one, I put in a couple of sentences, and that's really what I would recommend being the maximum that you use for alt text, just a couple of short sentences. If it goes, or if you need to describe something beyond a couple of sentences, then that's where you may consider adding some more context to your document. So, you could use the alt text to kind of give a short description and also say more information can be found in the following paragraphs or something like that. So just keep that in mind, and that's really where I think the text equivalents can sort of play together. All right.
Lisa, I really like the idea of adding more information into the body, not just for individuals who have perhaps a visual impairment, and can't see the image, but also for people who have a cognitive impairment, whether that's a developmental disability or, a senior moment like I have, frequently,
Right.
where I just may not get the same meaning that you wanted me to get. And, depending on how important that image is to your message, it would be really helpful to have a little bit more information in the body so that, I can read it and get it, because I may not really get that from looking at the picture.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can help all kinds of people, really. I think that's the tenet of accessibility, really, is it can help more people than you even think. So we focus a lot on people who use assistive technology because that is what a lot of this stuff sort of is geared towards, but it can definitely help other groups as well. All right, we'll move on to our next topic, which is descriptive link text. So this one is not a super complex one, but I think that it's sometimes harder to put into practice than some of the other ones. It's a little more subjective, I suppose. But what I'll say about it is really, it's important that the link text makes sense in context at a minimum. So say you have a sentence that you're writing, and you have that you want to read more about this article, and read more is what has actually made the link. That technically passes accessibility rules, but unfortunately, it doesn't really do much for people who are maybe using assistive technology. They can actually pull up a list of links, for instance, or they can tab through them, and they may not actually get the context from that. The link, like someone that could see that it was related to the paragraph above it. So we really recommend avoiding things like click here and read more if you can. And so we'll kind of go through some examples of what to do instead of that. The first one is another thing to avoid, though. So I talked about some ambiguous type links. Well, this one is just an example of one that we have the full web address just listed out entirely, and it is actually linked. So this is not going to be good for anybody seeing this, because if I'm coming to this and I can see it, I don't actually know where this link is taking me. I can see that it's a government website from the Oklahoma government, and it's probably a form, but I don't know much beyond that. So I may be a little hesitant to click this even. I used to work in IT, so I'm a little hesitant when it comes to security things. This may make me feel a little bit unsafe. It may not make you feel that way, but that's just also something to consider. Also, in terms of assistive technology, somebody coming in with some of that is actually going to hear this potentially read out letter by letter. So it will take them a really long time to get through this link. And then again, they're not really going to know where this link is taking them. So instead of doing this with our links, it's really better to put in some more helpful link text like the one we have listed here. So this is actually, we've just taken that same link and then changed what the actual text is. And I'll show you how to do that kind of when we get to the end. You also may have issues or have a need for printing your documents out. So maybe your students take the documents that you share digitally and print them out as well. We can solve both problems with putting both types of links in here. So the first one we have in this example is the same link we have above that is actually hyperlinked. So if I hover over it, you can see it's going to take me out to that form that we listed above. And then we have the full link address just written out, but we've unlinked that. So it's not actually going to take anybody anywhere, and nobody's going to encounter it in a list of links or by tabbing to it if they're using a keyboard or assistive technology. So this is a way to kind of kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, if we need to have stuff that's printed. So what I wanted to show you is how you get to those settings. So, say that we actually wanted to change this to have better link text, because I think it's common practice for people to take that full address, paste it in, and I'll just kind of do that actually. So it's a little easier to illustrate. So I'll just paste my plain text in and then click, put a space in. So it's auto-linked for me. That's a pretty standard practice. But say we want to change that text now to be a little more descriptive. We would right-click our link, click Edit Hyperlink, and then we have some options. Our options are, well, we really need to focus on two areas, just this text to display and this address at the bottom. So this is going to be the actual link address that you copy, and this is going to be the text that's actually linked. So if I just want to make it match what's below, then I'll just type that in. And then click OK. So now my link is still there as I put it in, but the text around it has changed. So that's an easy way to do it. And I'll kind of right-click and go back to those options. So if you are doing a print version of that, I'm getting a question, screen tip. Oh, screen tip, that's a great question. Let me go back to that here in just a second. Okay, so if I right-click and click Remove Hyperlink, that would remove the hyperlink. So that's how I got this text that actually was auto-linked when I pasted it in to just be plain text again. Okay, so now let's answer the question about the screen tip. So if I go to Edit Hyperlink again, and then go to my screen tip, this is actually going to be something similar to what I showed you guys with that title field when we were adding alt text a minute ago. If you hover over that link, it's going to give you the screen tip in a little bubble that pops up. So this, you can add that if you want to. It's the same thing as with the alt text, but it's not going to do anything else for accessibility. So you really need to just make sure and add your text to display and use the screen tip if you like, but just know that it's just extra for somebody who's mousing over. Does that answer your question?
And so you're saying basically that the screen reader doesn't have a way to read. They don't have a way to hover and see that. So if that was
Right.
important information, you have to include it as the alt text description.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So the last thing I wanted to point out about links is the fact that, if you're kind of writing your sentences out maybe, and then you need to add links to the things that are already in your sentence, there is definitely a way to do that. So say I wanted to actually link out to an article on cats and dogs. So I would just highlight the text I've already got, and then again do a right click, and this time we're going to just push hyperlink, which is kind of towards the bottom, and then type in our web address. So I'm just going to put in google.com right now just to save some time. And now our sentence text that we had is already linked. And this is great descriptive text because it's already, we've kind of already built that meaning into our sentence. So I would highly recommend it if you can, kind of type out your sentences and then think about how you can add links to those, because that's going to kind of get you to a good place with your descriptive text automatically. So that's the last little tip I had on descriptive link text. I'll go ahead and move on to color, but if anybody has any questions, just jump in. Oh.
I had a question about, there are services that will shorten your links. So like Bitly, and I believe there are a few others. So is that recommended for any reason if you're using hyperlink text, or is it just something that you would want to do if the document is going to be printed out so that it's, easier to remember and someone can manually type in that shorter link?
Very good question. I would say that would look a lot better than this if we were to put that on the print version. You're still going to miss out on any informative link text if you just paste that shortened URL in there. So I would still recommend, even if you have a shortened URL, putting more descriptive text on it, unless you are using it for print. So that would be a great use of it, though, just a shortened URL for print.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right, we'll go into color now. So there are 2 points to cover in color. And the first is to avoid relying on color alone to convey any meaning. So I put in several graphs to kind of illustrate this point. The first one we have is just a standard line chart that has Series 1, Series 2, and Series 3, and those are blue, red, and green. So unfortunately for people who have color blindness or maybe even low vision, they may not be able to discern the differences in those colors. And it may look like what I have in the second image more to them. So they're not actually able to see which line corresponds to which series. So they're not getting any information really out of this graph, unfortunately. So I wouldn't say don't use color, but if you do use color, you need to do something in addition to the color. So in this corrected version of the same line chart as above, we just added triangles to Series 1, diamonds to Series 2, and squares to Series 3. So if I were to move the color from this one, it's going to look more like this chart right here. So you can still tell based on those shapes which line corresponds to which series. So the user who may not be able to see those colors is still getting the information from this graph. So it's also, I've seen this illustrated too in some documents. If you have maybe something in red, so somebody said maybe everything in red is really important, and then there's just red text kind of throughout the document. So that is also going to eliminate anybody who can't see those differences in colors from getting the information about which information is important. So in that particular kind of case, you could solve it by maybe putting in bolding as well as the red. So, you just always need to remember, don't just use color by itself. Make sure and have another way of discerning that information. Okay. We'll go ahead and move on to color contrast, just so we've covered color all in one. So this is, color contrast is the difference in the colors between the foreground and the background. So in this case, the first example I have, it's very light gray text on a white background. So it's pretty hard to see, for me even. Oh, how do you add those shapes? I can definitely answer that question if we get to, or if we have time at the end. If you don't mind. How do we add the shapes to the graph? Because I'm not sure actually. Yeah, I think I can do it. Okay, it's going to be in your styles, but we'll cover that at the end. Okay, so say I wanted to actually do some testing on this color contrast. There's actually a formula that was created by this group called the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative, and they're the people who put out the standards that we follow for web accessibility and also document accessibility. It's a really long formula. Luckily, no one needs to remember it because they have some great tools out there to help you test for the color contrast. I'll show you the one we like to use because it can be used on anything that you see on your screen. It doesn't just have to be used in a web browser. And it's free, and it's from the Paciello group. It's linked in the PowerPoint that's on the website. This is a pretty great tool because I can just kind of, like I said, test anything. So what I'll do is take my foreground color, which is that light gray text, just by using this color dropper, and kind of pinpoint my gray. And I'll leave the background color as white since that's the color it already is. And you notice I have two things to kind of look at. I have my contrast ratio at the very top, and that's a 1.3 to 1. So we're looking for a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. So this is very much below that ratio. It also makes it easier for you to see, if you don't really remember that 4.5 to 1, whether it's a pass or fail here in the bottom. So you're going to really kind of look for this top one. Most people typically try to follow the WCAG AA standards, which is not something you guys need to know at this time, but that's what the AA standard applies to, is the set of standards I was kind of mentioning earlier. There's a link in the PowerPoint that also kind of tells you more about that if you are inclined to look it up. Okay, so that was an example of the bad color contrast. Now I'll kind of show you what this other dark gray color looks like. I think this is also keyboard accessible, by the way, so you don't have to use your mouse to pinpoint things. Anyway, so once I grab that dark gray color, you can see it is above the 4.5 to 1 ratio, and it's passing for large and regular text. And also just a quick note on large text, you don't have to follow that same requirement of 4.5 to 1. It's a 3 to 1 ratio, but there is some debate on what constitutes large text. Some people think it's about 18-point font or above. So really, if you want to be safe, just make sure you hit that lower or the higher ratio rather than that lower one. Okay. Do we have any questions on color contrast?
I have a couple.
Okay.
Okay, so this software, is this something, well, is it software that you download, or is this something that you have to have the internet, to access when you're using?
It is something that you download. So it's a desktop app. So you'll go to the link, and then it has options for you to download it for Mac and for PC.
Okay, and another question about that. Can you use this tool with other software like Eventbrite? I've been using Eventbrite for registrations,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to know, gosh, is this, is this color contrast correct? And SurveyMonkey for the surveys we've been doing. So you can use it with that as well?
Yes, you definitely can. So, like I said, anything that you have up on your screen, whether it's a PowerPoint, Word document, or anything in your web browser, you can grab that color using that color picker. So that's why we like this tool, just because we can use it to test anything.
Very good. Thank you. So we have, gosh, about 6 minutes left. So I don't see any more questions. So maybe you can tell us how to add those shapes, unless you had more. Oh, you still have data tables to go.
I have data tables, but I can kind of quickly go through this because we can really get down into the weeds on this one. But I do want to leave time to answer that question about the shapes. Okay, with data tables, data tables are really intended to display raw data points. So I have just a simple table in, and you kind of notice I have the top bolded, and that's really kind of the standard way of doing tables, so that people know that this column is going to correspond to the rows below it. Again, when it comes to assistive technology, we need to put in just a little bit more behind the scenes so that they also can tell sorry about that, that these columns correspond to the rows below. So I'm going to add just a quick table just by going to my Insert menu and clicking Table, and then clicking Insert Table. I'll just do a 2-column and 3-row table, and I'm just going to put in fruits and vegetables. And I've just put in banana and apple for fruits, and vegetables, green bean and okra. Except I need to actually type the word bean. Okay, so at this point we can kind of visually style it using some of the, oh, it went all the way to the top. Wow, that's a fun trick. Yeah, I'll just have to do this with my bolding. It's not cooperating. I don't really want to spend too much more time on it. Anyway, so I would go ahead and just kind of visually bold that. You can use the table styles that weren't really working for me to sort of, design your table visually. But we need to add one more thing to make this table accessible. So if I kind of put my cursor out to the left of this row, right-click and click Table Properties, I'll come over to my Row tab once I have this new window pop up, and then I have some options at the bottom, and I'll click this Repeat as Header Row at the top of each page. So once I've done that, there's not much of a change that you can see, but what this will do is for screen readers and other assistive technology like Braille devices, it's going to associate that column to the rows below. So every time, when it's down and reading banana, it's going to actually announce fruits as well. So the person hearing this out loud isn't going to have to remember that fruits went with column 1 and vegetables went with column 2. It's going to be there for them already, read for them. So it's a very important thing to keep in mind. The other point I'll make about data tables is that this is kind of the only way in Word for them to be accessible. If you have something that's a little more complex, meaning that it has a row header in addition to a column header, you can't really do as much when it comes to Word. So if you have pretty complex tables, there is a way to make those accessible, but you typically will need to make those PDFs and then correct those tables in the PDF. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you can simplify your tables to have just a single column header, that's the best option for everybody. Okay. Last point about tables is that some people actually try to use tables to sort of position things on the screen. So I have an example of this down below, and so I asked how would you read this. So just for sake of time, this would actually be like, if you can see this, you would actually read this as, is this all right? But this was actually built using a table, and you can see that if I add the borders back. So tables are read from left to right and top to bottom. So in addition to getting some of the table announcements, screen reader is actually going to hear, all right, this is. So they're going to get the exact opposite meaning that you were intending. So this is really just a point to say, if you're using tables for layout, just be really careful to make sure the reading order is right. And also try to consider maybe using other word tools like columns to get that same look on the screen without messing with adding a table and getting the reading order a little bit off. Okay.
Good information. Looks like we have about 2 more minutes. Do you think you can cover the question about how to add shapes?
Yeah, let me go back up to it. And all right, so if I click on and I haven't done this in a while, so forgive me if it takes me a second, but I'm pretty sure I've just kind of clicked on the graph. I think you can click anywhere and this stuff will sort of pop up depending, no matter where you are on the graph. But I've gone over to this design tab that pops up if I have that graph selected, and I can just change the styles. So, you have one option here. This actually is listing out the data in addition to the colors, so that would work. And then I think that we have another option down here. Yeah, here's where you can get the shape. So it's actually style 11 on this particular chart. So there are definitely some styles you can kind of look at when you're playing with your charts, and some different ways that you can get your data represented. And I would say too, there are also ones to avoid. This is really funny to me. Microsoft is great at doing accessibility, but sometimes they do include stuff that isn't accessible. And so they actually have this one, that's got circles on it. Well, the circles aren't different enough to be able to differentiate this information. So that would actually not pass either. So just keep that in mind as you're going through. Not every one of the styles that Word recommends is gonna get you where you need to go.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Lissa. This has been really, really helpful. And also thanks to our participants for asking questions and just for joining us. So Lissa's contact information is here. If you have questions, you can contact her at 580-471-1393 or Lissa Prince at okstate.edu. If you needed documentation of your participation or if you have additional questions, feel free to contact me. You can email me at kimberly.berry@okstate.edu or call 405-744-8342. And of course, visit our website at any time. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a great day.